Doctors could be on the brink of a breakthrough.
Migraines.
How to control them. Tame a migraine.
A severe migraine.
Throbbing, recurring headaches.
Given all the noise, navigating the migraine experience can be confusing and scary, but you do not have to do it alone. Welcome to the Migraine Guy Podcast, the official podcast of themigraineguy.com and theheadachreview.com. Now, here's your host.
What is up, everybody? It's Kevin here, the Migraine Guy, bringing you the final podcast of November. I know I missed the podcast schedule last week. Last Thursday was Thanksgiving, so I didn't think many people would be expecting a podcast, / I just got busy, with family stuff, and then Friday we had more family stuff, and then by Saturday and Sunday I was making up for the stuff that I didn't get done Thursday and Friday, and so Monday, this last Monday would have been when I could have gotten the podcast out at the earliest, but I figured let's just take the week, try to come up with some good content for the next few podcasts. I'm going to try and do some batch recording today, so I'm going to try to record maybe 2 or 3 total podcasts. That way there's always one ready to go. The downside is that if I batch record too much, then any new migraine news that comes out after I have batch recorded might not make it into the podcast for a few weeks. So the reason I like doing weekly podcasts and recording just a few hours before I upload is because I can make sure that we're getting some of the latest migraine news out there. But then if I run out of time like last week, I can't get the podcast out. So, it's catch-22. One of those silly little decisions we have to make. But either way, we are back today. How is everyone doing? Let's see, this last week of actually last 2 weeks now of migraines for me have been pretty standard. Lots in the 3 to 5 pain range, a few that went up to the 7 range, which seems to be my new thing. Not exactly sure why. There's a little bit more stress with some stuff I'm doing for school. There's, normal daily things that go on, light exposure and whatnot, that trigger some migraines for me, but nothing really seems out of the ordinary. I'm just getting a couple more of the intense ones a little more frequently. Nothing too crazy, nothing to worry about, but, instead of getting 1 or 2 fairly intense ones a month, I'm getting about 3 or 4 now, with the rest being in that 3 to 5 pain range. So, just riding that wave. The big thing that I decided to do with my neurologist was, since he's pretty responsive to emails, and since we had already discussed the medication options that we had, and there wasn't anything new to say since he had emailed me his analysis of my MRI results a couple, what was that, like 6 weeks ago, maybe 2 months ago, I didn't want to go to the neurologist in person and, have to pay for a visit. They want to, after insurance, they want to charge me about $100 per visit, and so I just asked the neurologist through email, hey, can you go ahead and issue the prescription for these meds? I don't really want to come in for $100 just to have you write the prescription that we've already talked about, yada yada. And he was very willing, said yep, he's going to send the prescription over, and I decided to try the Trokendi, the time-release Topamax, and I was called by the pharmacist, who said that I was ready to get picked up, but that for some reason insurance didn't get the memo or something like that, and so I had to have the doctor fill out some after-the-fact paperwork in order to get insurance to cover it. Said, sure, I'll do that, took care of it. Next day, got the call from the doctor's office that Trokendi is not covered by my insurance. The actual phrasing that they offered, let me pull it up here. I don't know if insulting is the right word, but it's one of those things that I'm sure many of us are familiar with. Here is what the email said from my doctor, letting me know that the insurance had denied the claim. Quote, Kevin, Trokendi was denied by your insurance without a possibility of appeal, as it is not in their formulary. Do you want to try regular topiramate, end quote. So their formulary apparently can decide better than I and my doctor can, which is very great, and it's without the possibility of appeal. So on the YouTube channel, I'm going to be putting up a little how-to video about this app that you can get for your phone called GoodRx, and it's a way to get discounts for medications. And so I immediately went there after I got the notification that my insurance wasn't going to cover the Trokendi, and put it into their little search box. and pulled up the areas close to me that offer it, and the pharmacies close to me that have it, and what their costs are and what their coupons are, and all of them were over $600 for a 1 month prescription. And so that wasn't going to be financially feasible. But thankfully, after I ranted a little bit on in my Facebook support group, the Migraine Guy support group, about just how stupid it was and upsetting and blah, 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 all the normal kind of things that many of you were very familiar with when it comes to getting your insurance to cover your treatment, or not getting your insurance to cover your treatment. Someone suggested checking out Trokendi's website, and sure enough, they do have a discount program, a coupon program. Now, I'm not exactly sure all the details because I just signed up for it last night, and I'm waiting on, I don't know if it's paperwork or something, but I'm supposed to be getting an email kind of explaining how the whole program works. But they advertise on their website anyway that you can get a 12-month subscription for $0 if you sign up for their discount program. And the discount program is supposed to be this free way to get you med. Someone has to be making money somewhere with these meds, and so they wouldn't just give them to me unless they're banking on it actually working, and then me needing it long term, and then getting the prescription paid for by either me or my insurance. I'm not exactly sure, but it is something to keep in mind with medications out there, that if you get denied by your insurance isn't covering nearly enough of the cost, it's always a good idea to just search whatever the name of the medicine is, plus just in a normal Google search, just search the name of the medicine with a discount program after it and see what pulls up, because a lot of these big pharmaceutical companies want you to use their drugs, and so if you are going to go to a different drug instead of use theirs, they seem to be willing to take some of the hit on the cost in order to get you taking their pills or whatever. And so just something to keep in mind, something that I hadn't quite thought thoroughly about last night, because I was just really upset that there wasn't the possibility of appeal. Like, my doctor and I couldn't talk to the insurance and say, well, here are the reasons why generic Topamax isn't a good fit for Kevin. He's tried it before. The side effects were really intense. They really limited his quality of life, etc. They don't want to hear any of that, and so I was just really upset because of their, quote, formulary. So that was upsetting, but it's the kind of thing that many of us in the migraine world and many chronic pain patients experience on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis. I think next week's podcast, just to kind of pick up on this theme, might be a dedicated podcast, so like a long-form podcast, not broken up into sections like they typically are. And I might want to do something on the opioid crisis, because that is certainly affecting lots and lots of chronic pain patients. I know that there are lots of families that have been destroyed by opioids. It's not that it's not a serious issue, but people with chronic pain have and are being routinely overlooked, and having their meds limited, having their meds taken away, having their doctors treat them with suspicion because they want their prescription refilled, etc., etc. In fact, there's some people that are even touting phrases, some medical professionals that are touting phrases like pain acceptance. You can't, and the basic idea behind pain acceptance is that you need to accept that you live in pain, and these meds are not going to be available to you, so just deal with it, which is maybe one of the most insulting and Hippocratic oath consistent things that a medical professional could say and think is a good treatment plan for you. So might do a long form podcast next week on the opioid crisis. There's a lot of data to take into effect. I've been trying to read up on it as much as I can, and every time I do, it seems like there's 3 more things I need to read in order to get up on it. So that might happen next week. It might be similar to the style of this podcast, where I'll give you a little intro, and then we'll have segments on the opioid crisis instead of just a start to finish whole podcast on it where I just talk at you for 20 minutes. So there's that. That's kind of what to look forward to in the immediate future. Also, another reason I didn't want to get the podcast out on Monday was someone let me know, I need to apologize to you guys, someone let me know that at least on some of the podcast, the little interlude music that I use to break up the segments has been extremely the volume on it has been much louder than my talking volume, the volume you're hearing me now at. And so if you're listening on speakers at a computer or something like that, it might not be the biggest issue. Just turn it down and up accordingly. But if you're listening with earbuds or earphones, the jolt from the volume change could be really intense, and might even trigger a migraine, which I would feel terrible about doing to you. So I'm doing my best to make sure that the audio software I'm using is actually regulating the audio levels. It said it did. I've checked all the podcasts. They were supposed to have their levels automatically adjusted so that there wouldn't be those big spikes, but apparently that wasn't working. So I will do my best to make sure that is all set going forward. So if you notice anything like that, please hit me up on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or YouTube. Let me know that there's a problem with the audio quality, because I really want to make sure, even though this is just a single person setup, this is just an amateur setup that I'm running, I want it to be as top notch as I can make it, and I certainly don't want to affect your listening pleasure by deafening you every few seconds with some music. So apologies for that. Apologies for no podcast last week. I hope your Thanksgiving was good if you celebrated Thanksgiving, if you live in the States. Hope you didn't have too many family issues or political or religious arguments or any of the kind of stereotypical negativity that goes on with the holiday season. Hope it was relaxing. Hope you look forward to whatever the next holiday is that's coming up. Very thankful to have an audience. I think we're going to hit 2,000 downloads this month, which is a landmark I've been hunting for since I started the podcast. It was 1,000 downloads, then 1,200, then 1,500, then 1,800, then 1,964. So I'm hoping to break that 2K number. But so let's see. We are going to get to some migraine news. All right, this week's bit of migraine news is about an article that you may have seen headlines for. I certainly posted some links to it on social media. The title of the article that I will link to in the show notes below is quote, migraines linked to high sodium levels in cerebrospinal fluid. Now, a couple things to keep in mind about this study. Like many migraine studies, this study was a fairly small study. The study used 24 women, 12 of whom get migraines and 12 of whom do not, and who are otherwise, according to the study, fairly equal in their healthiness apart from migraines. And what the study was looking for was whether or not there was some sort of diagnostic tool to support diagnosing migraines in a way that wasn't just you telling the doctor your symptoms and the doctor saying, well, maybe you have migraines, which is kind of the normal way that migraines get diagnosed. It's a clinical diagnosis. It's something you go into a clinic for and talk to a doctor about. There's not a blood test. There's not any of the more verifiable ways of being sure that what you have is what the doctor says you have or what the doctor thinks you have. And so studies like this are really interesting when they look into ways to try and find biochemical, some physiological markers maybe that can be used to say, hey, you have this particular thing in your blood, or you have this in this particular study's case, this concentration of sodium in your cerebrospinal fluid. That is an indicator, a very high indicator that you have migraine. So that's why this study was very interesting to me. So let's get to some of the meat in the study. So let's see. The lead researcher was Dr. Melissa Meyer, and her colleagues explored an MRI technique called cerebral sodium MRI as a possible means to help in the diagnosis. MRI obviously is typically the kind of thing that would rely on protons to generate an image, but sodium can be used for visualization purposes as well. And the thing that was very interesting, was that the researchers found no statistical differences between the two groups for sodium concentrations in gray and white matter in the brain, areas of the brain stem, and the cerebellum. However, there was a statistically significant difference when the researchers looked at sodium concentrations in the cerebrospinal fluid, the fluid that surrounds the brain and spinal cord. It kind of provides a cushion for the brain while also helping ensure chemical stability and overall proper brain function. Now, overall, the sodium concentrations were significantly higher in the brain's cerebrospinal fluid in migraine patients than in the 12 healthy people in the control group. And so what this is just the kind of study that says, hey, there's this really interesting distinction between a migraine sufferer and a non-migraine sufferer, so we need to really look into it. it. We need to get more information about why there was, at least in this particular study with these 12 women, why they had statistically a significant higher amount of sodium in this part of their body versus the healthy control group. And so that's kind of where the study ends. It's just a small little study that says, hey, there's this kind of interesting thing going on that we should look into more. So I really hope that this gets a bigger study with more detail, that they look at the causes of why cerebrospinal fluid might have a higher sodium content for migraine sufferers versus non-migraine sufferers, right? Theoretically, it might have something to do with the fact that, salt, sodium as a neurotransmitter might, interact with the brain in a way that makes it more susceptible to seizure-like electrical storms, which is how the migraine brain operates during a migraine attack, and then it goes into a kind of depression afterwards, a cortical depression. And so it's just interesting, very interesting study. Hopefully, this gets some funding, gets some more research. I think what was her name? Dr. Meyer. I'm not exactly sure what university she teaches at, but she presented this at the Radiological Society of North America, the RSNA, and they have the article that I am going to link to in the show notes. You can get more information about the study in general. They actually have some images there if you want to see the MRI results. They also have ways of contacting them, so I think I am going to send them an email just saying, hey, thanks for the study. What are future plans for the this kind of diagnostic tool for migraine sufferers and stuff, and just see if they have plans, if they have funding, and if not, how they can get funding. I kind of want to know the mechanics of how these studies get funded. Obviously, there's money to make, but there's also the benefit to migraine sufferers, which is what I am interested in. So that is it for the migraine news portion of our podcast. A nice little study talking about some diagnostic potentials for migraine sufferers, and then you don't have to rely on the in-person clinical diagnosis. There could potentially be a way of saying, no, you have this X level of sodium in your cerebrospinal fluid. That means you are much, much more likely to have migraines. And so that would be interesting. It would be great also for insurance, right? You can point to specific tests that you're taking and saying, look, these things are correlated with migraine. You can't deny coverage for me on this, that, or the other thing. So all of that is very interesting, very good work. And let's get to this week's migraine tip. All right, this week's migraine tip of the week is actually going to be 7 tips that you can use to help keep your medical bills as low as possible. This article that I'm going to be talking about, which is highlighting 7 things, is a combination effort from NPR, ProPublica, and a bill wrangling organization called MedLiminal. Combination of, medical, limit, and minimal, I guess. It's kind of a mouthful, MedLiminal. But what MedLiminal does is they act on your behalf to reduce the costs of certain procedures or things that a hospital or insurance company is wanting to charge you for, and they get a small percentage of what you do pay, so it benefits both them and whoever your medical provider is, but it also is supposed to help you reduce the overall amount that you pay. But what the little article is that I'm going to be talking about is ways that you can actually do it without needing MedLiminal or some other person to stand in on your behalf to fight for reducing your medical bills. And so it's a nice combination of the press focusing on an area of healthcare that is bad, but also giving us some tips on ways that we can make sure that we don't get taken advantage of any more than we need to. So, tip number 1 is to make sure the proposed test or treatment is necessary. Ask what might happen if you don't get the service right away. When I went to the ER for my migraines, the one and only time I went to the ER for my migraines, I actually did this just because I'm naturally cheap. Frugal is the positive way of spinning it. Cheap is the probably more accurate way of spinning it. But when I went to the ER, they wanted to do, a CT scan. They wanted to take my temperature. They wanted to give me an IV of just normal saline. And I stopped all of those processes from happening and asked, well, why would I need this? I haven't even seen the doctor yet. The doctor hasn't even come in to diagnose me or even hear why I'm here. Why would you automatically want to do all of these things that I'm sure are going to cost at least a few $100s? And they said, well, it's standard procedure. It's what we do. We want to make sure you don't have anything else wrong with you. And you just have to put your foot down and make sure that they understand that if you don't consent, that they are not going to do the process, because you're going to get charged for that whether or not you need to. Now, yes, I could go in for migraines, and it so happens that they find out that I have a disease also, and that would obviously be good. But at the same time, if you're pretty sure that your health is good overall, some of these proposed tests and treatments you can't push back on. You just have to be willing to do it. Make it a little awkward and get into a little disagreement with your medical professionals. They might not like you, but at least you will have more money in your pocket when you go home. So that's tip number one. Tip number two is ask for the price before the test or treatment. Now, prices may not be negotiable if they're set by your insurance company, and that is very important. The hospital and the insurance companies don't always charge the same thing, and so what one costs versus what the other is going to charge you might be different, but it's always good to at least know beforehand what the costs are going to be. Now, when I went to the ER, I really wish I had done this part, because I've been going back and forth with the ER's billing department, the hospital's billing department, for about 3 years now, because they want to charge me $629 for just sitting in a room to talk to the doctor about what kind of things they could do for the migraine pain I was in. $629. Now, I didn't ask the price beforehand, but I did tell the receptionist that I do not want any treatments. I just want to know what the options are. And so the ER has been fighting me back and forth on trying to get that money, because I sat on a bench and talked to a doctor, and I will go to my grave fighting this. I swear to God, I will go to my grave. But if I had asked the price beforehand, well, is there any cost associated just with talking to the doctor, I would have found that out, and I wouldn't be in this battle with them. But it is a good practice to just ask for prices beforehand. And the doctor, the nurse, the phlebotomist or whatever might not know. They might need to get someone from the billing department. But hey, they are at work, so make them do some work. Number three, tip number three, write on your financial agreement that you agree to pay for all treatment by providers who are in network, which means that they have set rates with your insurance company. The medical providers may not accept the altered form, but then you'll know ahead of time that they were going to potentially invoke some out-of-network care, and providers that would jack up your medical costs. Now, if they're not willing to do this, that's fine. Maybe want to look around for someone else if it's not an emergency situation, but at least you'll know what to expect a little bit, even if they say they can't accept that form. Tip number four, if possible, get the billing codes the medical provider will use to charge you, and contact your insurance provider to make sure that each code is covered. Now, if you're in the midst of a horrible, level 10 migraine and you need some DHE, or you need some sort of chemical cocktail to bring down the pain, you might not be able to swing this. But if you're going to your normal doctor visit and the doctor's tossing around some ideas about things to try, well, you can ask for those codes and then contact your insurance to make sure that they will be covered. And given that you're following all these tips, I assume you'll be able to figure out the prices associated with each of those and what your final bill should be. So this is a great tip. Tip number five, if you're having a procedure, try to get the national provider identifier and or tax ID number of the surgeons, anesthesiologists, and all of the assistants. Contact your insurance company to see whether the providers are in network, which results in the negotiated rates. Now, if you're doing tip number three, which is your writings, on the form that you are only going to pay for things that are in network, this might not be a relevant tip, but if they're not going to accept that form and you need the procedure or whatever done anyway, at least you'll know ahead of time what the overall costs are going to be. Step number six, demand, and I'm going to italicize this in my head, demand an itemized bill, and then look at each specific charge. Medical bills are often riddled with errors. Now, this is very, very true. When I have asked for an itemized bill on this ER visit about a dozen times, and finally actually got one with one line on it that said medical room usage $629. But that was the first bill that I got that actually broke down what the charges were for. And there are actually some interesting back and forth that they went with my insurance, where they wanted to charge my insurance. My insurance sent them some money, and then the insurance got refunded. None of this was told to me, and so I had to do some digging to figure out what everything meant and why it was all on my medical bill. And while there weren't any errors in the sense that they charged me for things that were erroneous or whatever, it did look like there could have been that kind of stuff. And I know plenty of migraine sufferers, and know plenty of people who've been to the ER and have gotten bills for, multi-thousands of dollars. And turns out that there were at least a few very, very, very expensive errors on the bill, and helped reduce their bill overall by challenging it and making sure that every single thing that they were being told to pay for, they actually had done. So very important tip. Tip number 7, the final tip, is to ask whether the provider has a financial assistance policy, which could result in a sliding scale discount. Many people do qualify, and discounts can range from 20 to 70%. Now, they don't like to advertise this unless you have been sent to a collection agency. They really like to get the full price for whatever procedures they're doing, and in some sense, that's totally understandable. They want to make the most money. That helps them provide the best care, or so they say. But if they're going to offer a 20% discount on whatever process you're doing just because you asked a question, I want to save that 20%. This gets back to my cheapness. So all of those tips together are really important. I'm sure there are a couple more tips that we could add. I'd love to hear what your particular tips are when you go to the wherever, ER, hospital, doctor's visit, to reduce your overall costs. Not to get too political, but like oil, medication, people that make medications, big pharma, and insurance companies make billions of dollars every year, and they always, when get challenged on this, always act like they're playing the victim. They always act like they're a victim, like, oh, it's real hard, there's too many rules, we just want to help patients. But if they really wanted to help patients, we wouldn't need these tips. But we do need these tips because medical costs are just exorbitant, at least here in the US and other places. But make sure to implement these tips. If you have tips of your own, hit me up on social media. Just search The Migraine Guy on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, and hit me up with your tips. Maybe they'll appear in next week's podcast. All right, everyone, with that, we are wrapping up the show now. Thanks so much for tuning in. Thanks so much for downloading. If you haven't already, I would really appreciate you heading over to iTunes if you're an iTunes user and leaving a review of the podcast. Hopefully you want to leave a 5-star review, and hopefully you want to leave some positive comments. I don't ask for those because they make me feel better, although they do. I ask for those because the more comments and ratings that a podcast gets, the more likely iTunes is to recommend it to people who have similar interests to you. And so if you're interested in migraines and migraine podcast, other people who have those interests will be alerted that there is a podcast out there like this one. Now, there are a couple new podcasts that have cropped up. Like I said a couple weeks ago, Migraine Again has started one. I think the American Migraine Foundation is starting one, or has started one, but is mainly doing videos instead of podcasts. I'm not entirely sure what's going on there. But I remain your steadfast source for migraine-related information. I was doing it before they were. I'm just kidding. I like both those organizations a lot, and their podcasts are good. They're different than mine, right? So there's a variety of ways to get good migraine information. Migraine Again is mainly interview-based, whereas what we do here is a little bit personal. I give you my story, and then we talk about some migraine news, and then do a migraine tip of the week. So that's what you get here. Hopefully you like it. If you haven't hit subscribe, why haven't you? Please go ahead and hit subscribe. Also, if you're not following me on YouTube, you should. I'm getting ready to start relaunching a bunch of videos. I got my camera set up better. I got some other upgrades in the works, and so things are going to be happening back on the YouTube channel a lot more frequently than they have been. Also on Facebook, I'm about to hit 900 likes on my Facebook page, so if you want to be number 900, head over there. Just facebook.com/The Migraine Guy, and make sure to hit that like button. Hit me up on Twitter. I always post stuff there related to migraine. I am on Instagram, as I have said, though I'm not nearly as active as I should be. I just don't like taking photos and uploading photos that much. But I'll do my best. I'll do my best. Let's see. Anything else? I do have a Patreon account. If you like this podcast, you like what I do here at The Migraine Guy, what I do, if you like it, on theheadachreview.com, you can head over to patreon.com/The Migraine Guy, and you can become a patron. A patron is someone who says, hey, your work is important enough to me that I'm going to commit to giving you $1 or $2 every month. You can do as little as $1 a month. I have one of those donors right now, and it just is a little bit helps me cover the cost of hosting the podcast on the internet, helps me cover the cost of buying new microphones and audio software. It covers the cost of some of the things associated with doing all of this stuff. So if you want to help me out, I would greatly appreciate it. After all, it is the season. So anything else? I don't think so. With all that being said, everybody, hope you have a good week, and please remember that you are not alone.